Which languages does Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, actually speak? Well, let's find out in today's video. Firstly, and most obviously of all, he speaks English. This is, of course, quite helpful, being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and this is his first language. So let's first look at the type of English he speaks, what dialect or accent he speaks. And in fact, Rishi has told journalists before about the way that he speaks English and indeed why he speaks the way that he does. So, to quote an article from The Guardian from earlier this year, his mother, he added, was particularly conscious of how her children spoke. One of the things my mum was obsessed with was that we didn't speak with accents and we would speak properly, he said. She was keen for us to try to do some extra drama. And this is reflected in the way that he speaks, because while Rishi Sunak was born in Southampton in 1980, his general accent doesn't really reflect the local regional accent of Sussex and the neighbouring area. Rather, it sounds somewhat different, and this is because of his very high class and privileged education, going to Winchester College just up the road from Southampton and then studying further at Oxford. His way of speaking English is rather more RP, or received pronunciation, what was once thought of as being the proper way to speak English. While Sunak did spend some time in America, this hasn't really affected the way that he speaks, and indeed received pronunciation is probably the closest description of the way that he speaks English, although this does change depending on who he's talking to. So for example, his address to the Conservative Party General Assembly sounds rather posher than when he's speaking to other news outlets or to more common people, which is a common thing that we see with politicians.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
So, number one, English, his mother language. But this isn't the only language that he speaks, as Rishi Sunak, as the name suggests, has two Indian parents. And these Indian parents particularly come from the region of Punjab, which is one of the provinces in the north of India, a historic region which is today split with India and Pakistan as well. And because of this, both of his parents' native languages are Punjabi. And so it's very likely that Rishi Sunak has a good grasp of the Punjabi language, as even though at home they spoke English, undoubtedly he also learned to speak some of this language. Now, Punjabi is actually the 10th most commonly spoken native language in the world, and is spoken by around 103 million people in mainly India and Pakistan, as well as in the Indian diaspora, when people from what had been the British Raj oftentimes would go to other places that were controlled by the British Empire and in more recent years have just emigrated freely to different countries. Indeed, Sunak has told the media that he can speak Punjabi. He never speaks the language in public, and so we're not sure as to what level this language is, whether he is fluent in this language, whether he was brought up in Punjabi as well as in English, and there may be political reasons why he hasn't shed light on this further and is being more open about the way that he was taught English by his parents rather than any of his ancestral languages. The third language that he has said that he speaks is Hindi, another language from the Indian subcontinent. Hindi acts as somewhat of a lingua franca, or rather a lingua Hindi, if you will, particularly in the what's called the Hindi belt, which is in the central north of India, where many different people speak Hindi, some as a first language, but many more speak it as a second or a third language because of this linking factor, allowing them to communicate with many other people in India. Of course, English also plays a similar role in India. However, what's different about Hindi as opposed to English is its particular use in Bollywood, in music and in film and television and radio. It's incredibly important as a language for the Indian diaspora as well, because this is a link back to India that English is not necessarily the same, seeing as English is a global language, while Hindi is more of a link back to the Indian subcontinent. Now, we know that his wife, that she does speak Hindi and has spoken Hindi in public. She was born in India, and so it's quite possible that they together are able to speak Hindi. Although that's his wife rather than Rishi Sunak himself, he has said that he is able to speak Hindi too. Now note that Hindi is the term used for the language in India, but pretty much the same language is also spoken in Pakistan, except then it's called Urdu. This is a difference in the script that's used and some of the words that are used, but really this is the same language and the two are mutually intelligible with one another. So if we then look at the most spoken languages again, Hindi without Urdu, so that which is spoken in India, is the 5th most spoken native language in the world. If we were to consider it as one language, which is then referred to as Hindustani, that actually overtakes English as being the 3rd most spoken native language in the world. But for my calculations, because I'm terrible at maths, it's easier to split them like this, in which case we can work out with how many people Rishi Sunak can communicate in their native language. Seeing as he speaks English, Hindi and Punjabi, we then come to a figure of 827 million people. So that's around 10% of the global population, just under 10% with whom Rishi Sunak can speak in the native language. And of course, many, many more who have learned English, Hindi or Punjabi as a second or a third language he can also communicate. So that's really a lot. So those are the 3 languages that Rishi Sunak can speak: English, Punjabi and Hindi, although with the second 2 we're not entirely sure what his level of proficiency is between those. He's not the only British Prime Minister throughout history who has spoken more languages. As far as I'm aware, there's only been one who has had not English as his first language, and that was David Lloyd George, who was raised with Welsh as his mother tongue, although he could also speak English. But another honourable mention, though he wasn't officially Prime Minister, he did rule in coalition with the Conservative Party back when I was a child in England, and that's Nick Clegg, because Nick Clegg is somewhat of a polyglot among politicians, being able to speak English, French, German and Spanish, but most importantly of all, because of his mother, he could speak Dutch. Cue the music.